It's good to see y'all. We are here to talk about Victoria Collins. You know, it's obvious to us that Victoria Collins must have read a lot of murder mystery books because she thought that she could murder a friend, someone she knew from the time she was 16 years old, and get away with it. And she not only decided to murder this person, but she decided to wrap up a Ledger newspaper reporter in the process using a call to him from a phone she purchased to help prepare a cover story for her, supposedly throwing us off the track looking for this Tamika and her boyfriend. Well, what she didn't realize is this is real life, and she was dealing with real professional homicide detectives, and we unraveled her story very quickly. And it all started when we found Gary underneath a tarp, underneath a piece of fencing, behind a shed in behind an area where he rented a mobile home. Well, now Gary, who had spent 20 years in prison, didn't rent just any mobile home when he came to Florida from New York, but he just happened to have rented the mobile home from Victoria Collins, who he has known and been intimately involved with since at varying times, all the way back to 16 years of age. Here's what's interesting about this. Victoria Collins allowed Gary to rent her mobile home, but her husband, Bill, had absolutely no idea that Gary had come to Florida. In fact, we're told ostensibly they had moved to Florida to kind of get Victoria and Bill away from Gary. So now he shows up. He's renting a mobile home from Victoria. Victoria is, in addition to that, allowed Gary to put his car in her name to kind of help him with the fact of he's a sexual predator and is supposed to register, and he really didn't want to register. So his vehicle is in Victoria's name. Now let's take this one step further. Not only is the vehicle in Victoria's name, but Gary has put Victoria on one of his bank accounts so she can have access to the money. So she can have access to the money in order ostensibly to pay the rent and bills whenever Gary is away as a long-distance truck driver. So apparently Victoria has a problem. She is retired from the post office, from the Postal Service, and has a retirement. Her husband, Bill, is retired from, or is going to retire from the Postal Service, from the post office next year and have a retirement. So she's got a problem with financially being secure and continuing to live in her nice house, or kind of hang out with this guy who she's had their thing for in a mobile home. We suspect that she had to do away with Gary because although she's emotionally attached to him, she's married to Bill, and that's where the financial stability is. So we find this body underneath his tarp, and sure enough, through fantastic work of the medical examiner, we first identify this person. Subsequent to that, we received the toxicology back just recently, and Gary has a significant level of what is commercially known as Ambien, or a sleep narcotic, in his system. Well, an investigation by, once again, our homicide detectives shows that Gary has no prescription and no legal access to Ambien. But wouldn't you know it, Victoria Collins just happens to have a prescription for Ambien. And wouldn't you know it, the day before we believe he died, the last time anyone heard from him, Victoria got her Ambien prescription refilled. So this all boils down to a circumstantial case. And what we've determined through circumstance and through evidence, as these pieces come together, we have several different pieces of evidence, but we don't have them tied together. And all of a sudden, this mysterious phone call occurs to the Ledger reporter by Tamika, saying, "Oh my goodness, I just read in the newspaper how this Gary guy had died, and I fear my husband or my boyfriend or whoever he is, significant other, killed him because I'm a prostitute, and what we do is we drug these guys, and then when they're unconscious, we rob them or take their wallets and their belongings." The information she gave to the Ledger reporter clearly told us that no one but the murderer and our homicide detectives knew that information, i.e., one piece of information was she said, well, when my boyfriend came back, he had blood on his hands, and he had this Gary guy's wallet and his shoes. Well, when we did our crime scene investigation, there were no shoes on our victim. We also know that subsequent to the last time that we saw Gary alive, or someone knew of Gary being alive, Victoria had given away some of his furniture, his outdoor patio furniture, had gone into this house, was cleaning up his house, had made an attempt to sell his car, which was in her name. Now, all the while she's telling us, I don't know where Gary is. I guess he's out on a long-distance truck run. We see bank records showing where Gary was no longer employed. He said, hey, I've come into an inheritance and I'm going to retire. It was about $30,000. He paid off a bill for about $22,000. He had $8,000 in the bank. We see after Gary ceases communications that she is in Spring Hill with her cell phone, and miraculously, Gary's cell phone number is in Spring Hill. And then she's in Tampa, and miraculously, Gary's cell phone is in Tampa. And when we do our investigation, we find out that the cell phone that she called the reporter on was purchased from a Walmart. Just happens to be the same number that she purchased from Walmart, made the phone call to the Ledger reporter saying they were Tamika. Our detectives did an outstanding case. And quite frankly, the reason they were able to do this case in such a magnificent manner was because of their experience and because of cooperation. And cooperation in this case came from an unusual source, the media. The media, through no fault of their own, was thrown in the middle of the criminal investigation when Victoria was fictionalizing this set of circumstances and using that to qualify the reason that Gary was dead. Her hope was that the media would run this elaborate story saying, hey, we got the lead on who the suspect is. It's Tamika and her boyfriend, and run us down that path, and here she would be protected by some Pulitzer-winning news story. Well, Clifford Parody and the Ledger were too smart for that. They figured out early on that that didn't pass the smell test, that they were being taken advantage of. And ultimately, that conversation between Tamika and Clifford Parody tied several pieces of evidence together that, as I said once again, only the murderer and our homicide detectives knew to be fact. Any questions?
Well, Sheriff, once you were able to confront her with this information, how cooperative was she? She helping, admitting to anything at all?
She initially provided some statements to us, but she lawyered up. This lady is a black widow. I mean, when you can murder somebody that you've known since you were 16, when you can murder someone who you've had an intimate relationship with, when you can murder someone who, according to some sources, she actually had his baby, although it was charged off to another man, when you can murder somebody who you allowed to come from New York to stay in a rental unit and hid that from your husband, when you figure out that you're boxed up, the car's in your name, you're on his account, and now he's a problem because he's hedging in on your financial secure environment, somebody's got to go. So she had to choose. Am I going to kill my husband? Or am I going to kill my boyfriend? And she said and admitted to the detectives, well, my heart told me that I was going to go with Gary, but my head told me otherwise. You see, Gary thought all along that she was going to leave her husband once he retired and go with Gary. So at the end of the day, in her mind, she had to kill one or the other. That's the supposition that we've put together based upon the facts and the circumstances as we know them.
But she hasn't shown your detectives any kind of remorse?
Oh, no. No, she doesn't know why in the world we'd lock her up for murder. Once again, as I said, she's read a lot of murder mystery novels, but she didn't count on one thing. Killing someone in Polk County, where for 8 years we don't have an unsolved county murder, and dealing with one of the best homicide teams, or I think the best homicide team in the entire nation. They unraveled her story. They put a beautiful set of circumstances together that will lead everyone to only one conclusion: that Victoria killed a boyfriend that dated back to the age of when she was 16.
How exactly did she kill him, like with the pill?
We know that there is a toxic level of Ambien in the system. Was it enough to kill him, or was it just enough to incapacitate him? The medical examiner says at the very least it's enough to incapacitate him. So, did she murder him by some other method after he was not able to fight back? That is going to be a mystery until she decides to talk, because by the time his body was found, and it was found by the homeowners association who was cleaning up an area, had hired a gentleman to clean up an area, and when he was rolling off an old piece of fence, he saw him underneath a gray tarp. So he was obviously, after being left on the ground in that condition for a long time, he had decomped on us pretty bad.
So you didn't see any other trauma that was noticeable?
There was no other noticeable trauma, but with the decomposition on the human body to the extent this was, that's not unusual.
How motivated do you think that she was to get a hold of whatever was left of the inheritance?
She had access to it, and obviously she couldn't take all $8,000, but I truly don't think, in my mind anyway, that maybe she killed him over $8,000. I doubt it, because she had enough of a relationship with him that she could have gotten most of it. I mean, she was on his bank account. She had his car. Some people say she had his baby at one time. But she was boxed up because they came to Florida to get away from him. She lets him come down in a rental unit. Her husband doesn't know. She's looking at this and going, this stuff doesn't add up. Somebody's got to go. And instead of her husband going, she chose for Gary to go.
Your thoughts on how difficult it's going to be for prosecutors to win this case without knowing the method of death?
Oh, it's a slam dunk. This investigative team has convicted people of murder when we didn't even find the body. We got tons of evidence, tons of evidence. We got physical evidence. We got circumstantial evidence. We've got a great case here.
Can you explain just on the timeline as far as contacting the Ledger reporter and when you guys started your case? Had you already been looking into this? Did you already find? I am confused. Did you already find the body before that?
We found the body.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the story ran in the newspaper. Clifford Parody, if y'all know him, is a great reporter. He went to the residence. Nobody would answer the door, so he wrote his private cell phone number on his business card and slid it under the door. And voila, Tamika calls his private cell phone number. And he's never given his cell phone number to a Tamika. And the phone number that she called from was a phone that she purchased for the purposes of making that phone call. And we just happen to have all of those purchase records from her. And the things she said on that phone call to Clifford Parody, only the murderer knew. Very interesting case. Okay. Now, someone wanted to know about our raspers we talked about. I think Fox talked about that. If y'all not familiar with the terminology raspert, it's because it's a relatively new word that I made up because I like it. A raspert is a criminal that aggravates people, takes advantage of people, may be known as a career criminal. Just a nasty, filthy, ugly, stinking, stealing individual. Well, here's the deal. There's two rasperts that were taking advantage many times of senior citizens up in the Davenport Northeast area of the county. There was at least 4 occasions where they went there ostensibly looking to buy a motor home or a mobile home or a home that was for sale. And while one of them would distract the homeowners, the other one would steal jewelry from them. This happened on 4 occasions, so we wanted to find the rasperts because they were taking advantage of wonderful people who were trusting them. We determined that the rasperts were Donnie Evans and Linda Wanko. They were arrested originally by Osceola Sheriff's Office. We figured they were working that entire quarter right there near Orange, Osceola, Polk, and Lake. They bonded out of jail, and then we rearrested Lisa, and she's in our jail now unless she's made bond again. But they had a scheme and a racket going. They thought they were really slick, but our detectives assigned to that area working with Osceola County got those rasperts in jail just in time for them to eat pressed turkey on Christmas Day with us.
Their MO is to distract, is that
They would go into the house ostensibly looking at it. The guy would say he's an architect, so he would get all caught up in looking at walls or construction and ask him about stuff, and she would slink off and go through jewelry boxes and that sort of thing in the bedroom. And they had them a nice racket going. And we also see the evidence where they were pawning the pawning the jewelry and stuff at different pawn shops. So it worked for a little while, but it didn't work for a long while. Rasperts, by the way, are not only criminals, they're not very smart. And that's why they're in jail. Y'all feel free to use that new name. I haven't got a copyright on it yet, but We are putting it in the Urban Dictionary and doing the background on it and sending it to Merriam-Webster's dictionary so they can have a new responsible name describing criminals. We call them other things. Some people don't like you to call them thugs. Well, sometimes you need to call them thugs, but on the occasions when they're not thuggish, they're aspirants. If I don't see y'all before, have a Merry Christmas. Take care.
Sheriff, I have